Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special edition of the Midweek Wire. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. We're streaming out live on X, on Rumble, on YouTube, as well as Odyssey, Facebook Live, and also we'll be on the audio streams after the show. And of course, you can go to 21stcenturywire.com. That's the mothership. You can always watch us live there. This will also have the recordings loaded up onto the various platforms after the show. If you miss anything, don't worry, it's all there on the archive. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Very important discussion today. This is such a vast topic. And you know, looking at our previous programs, we've gone into detail, really exposing Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program. And we believe that, and of course, the more you look into this, you can find out that this is the real problem that really lingers in the background of the region, but also U.S.-Israeli relations, not just U.S., but French and European-Israeli relations. All of this is predicated on this kind of nuclear blackmail scenario that Israel's been allowed to get away with for over 60 years. And we'll talk about the details of this, how this story began unraveling and where it's at now. We've got some great research. We're going to bring on to the stage as well Freddie Ponton is going to be joining us on the live link. We'll bring him up on screen right now. Freddie, thank you for joining us this week.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Good to be on the show, Patrick.
It's great to be with you as well, Freddie. I mean, this is such a deep topic, and I know you've done some incredible research on this, Freddie. So, I mean, I think the easiest jumping off point to get the ball rolling on this discussion about Israel's secret undeclared nuclear arsenal, that the United States is demanding a new nuclear deal with Iran, the same deal that Trump tore up in May of 2018. And meanwhile, the person who is pushing the U.S. to demand this new deal is the same country that demanded that Trump tear up the JCPOA. But that country, Israel, itself has an undeclared nuclear weapons arsenal between 200 and 300 warheads. And they're threatening to annihilate Iran, who doesn't even have nukes. So I mean, this whole scenario is so inverted, and everything is upside down and on its head. Now, I want to bring onto the screen right now. This is really where we want to start here, and we published this along with a lot of other great pieces. Obviously, you, Freddie, you have done a lot of work going through the National Security Archives of the United States, held at George Washington University. You've done a lot of research on this topic, and Freddie, each time you delve in there, we seem to find more evidence that's pointing to an incredible conclusion as to the scale and the size of this problem. It's been going on for over 60 years. This issue has been smoldering under the surface. I mean, this is probably the easiest place to begin with John F. Kennedy, Freddie.
Yes, absolutely, Patrick. I mean, it's, you know, for some of the researchers and journalists have spent more than 30 years, some of them even more, into looking into the assassination of the JFK. But it doesn't mean because you're an expert, and this is really my view, it's not because you spent 30 or 40 years looking into the JFK assassination that you've automatically understand everything that is to be discovered. You know, first of all, there's still a lot of documents that have not been released, you know, from the CIA, from the FBI, from Joe Edis, and so on. There's so many interesting files that we still don't have access to. So that's the first point. The second one is you cannot put all your eggs in the same basket when you really research deeply the JFK assassination. Not many of these researchers and journalists have spent many more years than I have, but you have to take an avenue, and you really have to see out what really works from an historical point of view and from a factual point of view. Now, as a French, of course, I'm looking into the information that is available in my country as far as our involvement with the Israeli nuclear program. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the own data, on-ground organic data that is available here that we can look at, and then trying to understand exactly how this entire French-Israeli cooperation, as far as providing Israel with a nuclear power plant, a plutonium plants, and then how in exchange the Israelis provided us with a technology which was born out in the United States, a technology that allows basically the making of nuclear weapons, something that the French did not have in the late 50s, early 60s. So really what really struck me when I look into the various characters that are kind of involved in satellite around the JFK assassinations, it is very interesting to see that many of them are linked somehow, somewhere with Israel, with the CIA, but also with a lot of technology, a lot of expertise in, very high-end technology, if you will, that is only available to very high level of classification program, if you will. So there is definitely here something that needs to be explored, and that's what I've did. And when I did it, very quickly I found names which are already part of investigations, like Perm Index, with the Bloomfield, the financing, for example, of the OAS, this entire operations in Algeria, and saying that this basically there are documents in Algeria that clearly shows this was a Mossad outfit, it was a Mossad finance operation. And on the back of that, we have, at least 30 attempts of assassinations against Charles de Gaulle, with many of them attributed to the OAS. And then, of course, you have the visit of JFK to Charles de Gaulle. And there's both kind of agreements on both sides that this Israeli nuclear program is a major problem. It goes against all the policies set out in the United States as far as limiting any aspect of developments of weapon of mass destructions, and to keep basically the Middle East nuclear free. So all these are very important because they're part of the context in which the discussions are taking place between the United States and France with regards to the Israeli program. And we know the documents are very clear that this technology was not available in Israel, it was not available in France. So that's been the technology that triggers everything that has allowed Israel to acquire a nuclear weapon program comes from the United States. And that's really what I'm interested in. And all the posts and articles that I've made available publicly was on the 21st Century Warrior is about to demonstrate in a very, very simple manner that there are documents that comes directly from the State Department in the United States that basically kind of recall the conversation, this kind of group, in Harvard, Kissinger's, all these guys are talking about the importance of this Israeli nuclear program. And of course, the great concern, because it goes against all the policies set out in motions, especially with JFK, which definitely didn't want to have a Middle East, weaponized with nuclear technology. So there was definitely a possibility from an abrupt hands of this nuclear program, which the Israeli at the time saw it as an existential tool, if you will. Never again. They did not want to basically be again a prey in the Middle East. There was a lot of tension at the time. And then, of course, all the rest is history after that. We can clearly see, and I think we talked about it last month, about all these testing that are taking place, nuclear tests taking place. And that is what the exchange is all about. If you go back to 61, 62, and so on, there's no way that Israel could test any nuclear weapon. It simply did not have the mean, did not have the technology, and didn't have the facilities to do that. We track them down to the Sahara. We track them down to the French Polynesia with the Mururoa Island and many others. And we have pictures, photos, and everything. And we have, more importantly, the entire documentations about how much nuclear activity was tested, and we know exactly how much enriched plutonium France had at the time. And we can clearly see, based on this data, that we were basically testing atomic weapons payloads that simply did not belong to us, because we just simply didn't have the material or that kind of quality to do that. And of course, in the context of these discussions, it's important to understand, by at least, this is what I think there is a consensus amongst researchers, that in 1967, this is the time where Israel acquired really a bomb, an atomic bomb that can be delivered, The payload can be delivered by different means, whether by sea, whether by air or by land, using Jericho missiles and so on. So this is well established, and all the documents we find in the United States confirms that there are discussions not about whether this nuclear weapon program exists. It's really more about how it can be contained.
Would you say, in your opinion, Fred, that it would not have been possible for the French to have the weapons end of the nuclear equation without Israel, and it wouldn't have been possible for Israel to have the nuclear power plant part of the equation without the French? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is no French nuclear weapon program without Israel, and there is no Israeli nuclear weapon program and even nuclear program without the French. And it's a it's a trilateral kind of sort of a deal. The trade is Israel has a great relationship, obviously, with Oppenheimer, so the Los Alamos lab is very clearly at the time, at the top of the art in terms of developing nuclear weapons. And Oppenheimer's is very kind of open, you can read letters and documents and many statements that he made about Israel. And he is meeting Ben Gurion, and he is telling him, Israel should acquire the nuclear weapon. So if we're trying to understand where this technology comes from, I mean, it's come from directly from God's hands. It's coming from the father of nuclear weapons, which are going to spend at least 5 years without any security clearance. That security clearance is going to be revoked, and during that period of time, I think it's more than 5 years, about 6-7 years, and during that period of time there is ongoing communications with Israel, Mossad, and of course Ben Gurion and his cabinet. So there's very little doubt that this is where, or at least some part of this intelligence and this technology that allows the building of a nuclear weapon come from the United States, from the Los Alamos lab. And it is quite clear that both France benefited from it. I think that is the reason why they've agreed with the deal, is that it's a very very small club, to obtain or to attain, if you will. You reach a small club of countries that have nuclear weapon, and that is a huge level in geopolitics, economics, and in terms of asserting yourself amongst the leading countries in the world. And clearly Israel, from day one, some of the documents I read, they don't even talk about this civilian nuclear program in Israel. Straight away from the get-go, it is quite clear this was to be the development of a nuclear weapon program, which they acquire the capabilities to deliver this payload in 1967. And then this is during that time that Israel developed their strategy of ambiguity, this ongoing back and forth with the United Nations, and as well as with the United States, a lot of visit. We remember Golda Meir coming to Nixon, having discussions about, acquiring more planes like the Phantom, F-16s, and then being able to acquire, obviously, more defense and also project, a lot of force within the Middle East, something that was also of great concern for the U.S. administration. So the Amimut, this so-called Israeli strategy of ambiguity, is very interesting, because if you look at it, it has very two strong pillars, if you will. The first one is really about maintaining the confidentiality of the nuclear operations, which involve, of course, refraining from testing or publicly declaring the possessions of nuclear weapons. So that's the first part, if you will, of the Amimut, this strategy of ambiguity. And then the second part, it is about enhancing its nuclear profile. It's very important for Israel to maintain this kind of speculations alongside the disseminations of indirect evidence regarding its nuclear capabilities. We both know that if, whether the US deep state or Israel intelligence did not want you to know enough about the veracity of this what we are suggesting here today, and what has been pretty much the worst kept secret, as many have said, and written as well. It's quite clear today that Israel wants the Middle East, wants the rest of the world to know that they have these capabilities. They just don't want you to know how much they have. And more importantly, and as I actually posted today, it's a very interesting discussion also to have, because we have the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, and 3 other presidents that have basically signed and that have alleged to have signed agreements and documents with the Israeli governments in order to put on paper this relationship, this ambiguity, to define it, to characterize it, and making sure that at no time Israel is bound to the Israel, or to dismantle their nuclear weapon program. So this become a loophole, if you will. And during that time, the only way, if you will, it's very clear, from Nixon, Carter, but also as well, especially with the Clinton administrations, that there's going to be a moment where the United States is going to have to break their own law, if you will, in order to accommodate Israel. And that's where it becomes the problem, because we now, as a country, the United States allowed himself to break his own law to accommodate a foreign power. That is absolutely unbelievable, how Israel has compelled 3 administration plus the Trump administration to go along with this program, to keep this dark hole going on, and to keep on feeding these speculations about the ambiguity of these programs, even if it's illegal. We have clearly, I've done a test, to see, we all at the age of the artificial intelligence. So I wanted to see, if, for example, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, and Grossi, and all the other guys that preceded him, if what is actually the position of the IAEA with regards to Israel nuclear weapon programs, is there actually a consensus? Can we actually find out a clear position from the IAEA? And then you ask many different AI platforms about what's available out there, so you don't have even to trying to think about, just use Grok. You will see exactly and very quickly that there is no absolutely intention from the Israeli government to allow any inspectors in the Dimona, but also in all the other sites. There are so many sites that involve nuclear weaponries. And of course, the Israeli industrial defense complex with Rafael and so on. So we know that this technology can be delivered by submarine, by air, with a lot of different capabilities, but also by ballistic missiles and so on, long-range missiles. And this is a rogue state. I think at this moment in time, we can clearly see that there is no interest for Israel to obey by any United Nations Security Council resolutions. But we can clearly see that everything that governs nuclear programs in any countries around the world is governed, in relation to various recommendations. And talking about recommendation, Patrick, if you allow me, I just will say at that, today in Iran, this is absolutely unbelievable, but we have the IAEA director, Rafael Grossi, landing in Iran this afternoon, and he's going to meet with Mohammad Eslami, the head of Iran Atomic Energy Organization, the IAEA, and he's obviously going to meet with the foreign ministers, with Arakshi, with Gary Babadi, the deputy minister. And what is really interesting is that he's coming at the very day where Iran is going to actually the Expediency Council is holding a vote of the country's accession to 2 very controversial international conventions, which are known as the FATF bill. One is the UN Conventions Against Transnational Organized Crimes, the Palermo Convention, and then the other one is the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. For those that are familiar with FFTF, they will know also that part of these bills include the financing of proliferations of weapons of mass destructions. That includes ballistic problem, nuclear, anything that has, a characteristics as a weapons of mass destructions. What are the odds that the IAEA, which has been kind of a little bit steps-sided by the United States in these ongoing discussions between Iran and the United States, which are mediated, as we know, by Oman, but the IAEA is not part of these discussions. And we can see they're nervous. They're not really comfortable. Grossi mentioned that. There was a great article on Le Monde today where he said, Iran is about, 70% away from, from getting the nuclear weapons, so putting obviously the heat on Iran again. But he's not talking about this FFTF. He's not talking about the Israeli nuclear power program. He's not talking about anything that matters, that will avoid this double standard and again, put Israel at the center, at the helm, if you will, of the Middle East as far as security is concerned. And that's what the entire debate is all about, is how much Iran is prepared to take, and how much weight this Israeli nuclear weapon program has into these negotiations.
Yeah, and just to backtrack a little bit to something you said previously at the beginning, was this tripartite situation, or tripartite alliance. Of course, the other part of that tripod is the United States. So Israel stole, as you said, the transfer of nuclear weapons technology via Oppenheimer, via the United States, and then the enriched uranium stolen from the NUMEC facility as well in Pennsylvania. And so France kind of benefited from stolen intelligence and material from the United States. So, from my point of view as an American, I don't see any difference really between the French and the Israelis in this transaction. They're on the other side of the Atlantic. They benefit from the theft of WMD technology that they shouldn't have had, both of them. But France, of course, is a staunch ally. Not always, more independent before, and certainly not in NATO under Charles de Gaulle. But that's all changed now. So it really this poison chalice, Freddie, of this secret nuclear program, and then France's nuclear program, which they used to leverage a seat onto the UN Security Council. This is kind of lurking in the background. Really, it is sort of poisoning a lot of things, in my opinion, in the background. This three-way situation, and it really sits at the hub of global power. Now, you mentioned rogue state, so I think this is the correct term for Israel. This is a rogue nuclear state. This is a crazed ideological ethno-nationalist country with no declared borders or a constitution, running an apartheid state, currently in the dock. I can't believe you have to repeat this, but it's so phenomenal. Currently in the dock of the World Courts of Justice for a genocide. And its prime minister is in the dock for war crimes in the ICC, along with their defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for the mass slaughter of women and children, civilians, and Palestinians. So if any country shouldn't have a nuclear weapons arsenal, this has to be it. It's not the mullahs in Iran, So here's what you've done here. Published this up at 21 Wired today. The real problem: Israel as the unchallenged nuclear proliferator. This is the real problem, actually. This kind of poisons any potential nuclear non-proliferation or disarmament agreement with Iran, because you can't have this thing in the background. It's just too massive, and it's beyond double standards, Freddie. And yeah, I mean this. Go ahead.
Let me cut the chase here, Patrick, because I think it's important people hear it. That's my point of view. It doesn't mean that I'm right, and I'm open to be corrected. But my point of view is very simple. Is my analysis when looking at what we are seeing at the moment, these ongoing conversations and the entire basically bozo show that we've been given for quite a bit some time with regards to Gaza. right? And Trump's announcements about, owning Gaza, and then this ethnic cleansing about sending them in another countries, well, they'll have a better place, better future, all that kind of, rhetoric. This is all part of what is considered, as part of intentional genocidal behavior, right? And I think that's what the ICC is trying to say. I think that's what the ICJ will eventually tell the world, in the years to come. But we don't have the time to wait for the ICJ to wake up and do something, and they have very little power anyway to achieve anything. What these negotiations is about, in my view, with Iran, is to put Iran in a seat in which Iran cannot agree, if you will, with the terms that are presented. And that is to paint Iran as basically someone that does not want to play along with the rules. Iran is a rogue state. He wants to keep on enriching uranium. He is a threat to the world, is a threat to Israel, and is a threat to the region. And therefore, the United States, as the world's savior, is bound to bring democracy to Iran. So that's what really is about to happen, if I can say that seriously. So the whole idea that all these negotiations are done in good faith, it's absolutely, in my view, really just simply doesn't compute. It does not compute because Iran has already explained, say, look, we have a nuclear weapon program. We were part of the GCPOA. Trump himself, got out of it because he had other priority, which was outlined by Israel clearly. And then on the other side, he wants to go back in and now say, oh, well, I'm going to make the rules, and, you better go along with the program or else. Same a little bit tactic that he's doing with Putin in with the Ukraine. You got to agree with me or else, I've never heard this kind of tactics working with any body that has actually nuclear weapon and that have a pretty large army. And then I think there's quite a lot of evidence today that points that Iran's is definitely, obviously, will be extremely damaged by an open war with Israel and the United States. But there's a quid pro quo. Nobody knows what Iran and what China and Russia are prepared to do, because we are talking here about the future of the economic world, how the economics of the world are going to be shaped for the 21st century, and who controls the trade in Eurasia, West Asia, especially Iran, strategic positions with the IMEC corridors, the India, Middle East, and Europe corridors. What are going to be the route that's going to be allowed to facilitate and entertain the trade from Southeast Asia and China and Asian countries? Who's going to take that? Will Israel be kept out of that roads and basically economically become absolutely irrelevant? Or is it worth fighting so that the US and Israel control Iran and therefore cut the road from the Indians, cut the roads from the Belt and Road initiatives, and making sure that this passage, for Iran to not Kazakhstan, anyway, their neighbors north and towards Russia is going to be cut, and that's really
the north-south corridor,
the north-south corridor. So that's
Russian trade, really, for the 21st century. But let's hold the geostrategic discussion a little bit towards the end, because you've also published here. This is a leaked email from Colin Powell. Okay, so this is an important piece of evidence, isn't it? Just to establish facts, right? So just explain to us. This is, I believe, DC Leaks is published on Loeb Log, which here we've got an embed of the email here. This is Colin Powell somewhat admitting or stating that Israel has 200 nuclear warheads. Basically.
Yeah, these are basically conversation that takes place in 2015, in between basically Jeffrey Leeds, which at the time was the U.S. Democratic Party donor, and the U.S. Secretary of State's a four-star general, Colin Powell. And this document was declassified. It's very interesting. It's not actually declassified. Sorry, it was hacked by DC Links and published by Loeb Log. And this document is very interesting because it clearly states, and confirms unequivocally that part of the discussions that they're having, we can hear that the negotiators can't get what they want, you know. And part of the discussions, if you read the email, it says anyway, Iranian can use they can't use one weapon or one nuclear weapon, and because, you know, if they finally make one, you know, it doesn't matter if they have basically nuclear weapon. That's what it says. But they said the boys in Tehran know Israel has 200 of these nuclear weapon, all targeted on Tehran, and we, the US, have thousands, you know. So this is at the time of Ahmadinejad, you know, and all these discussions surrounding basically Iran nuclear programs, and the discussions what obviously the Ministry of Defense and the Secretary of Defense and all the guys working in the regions from the interagencies are very much aware of this nuclear paragraph. So again, here what we have is an undeniable confirmation and knowledge, and they give you numbers. They're telling you. So some of the documents talks about 80 warheads, 80 nuclear weapons. These guys are talking about 200. Why on earth Israel would need 200 warhead pointed at Iran? If that is the current knowledge, you know, behind the scenes, you know, backstage, just out the conversations, common knowledge amongst the intelligence community, how do you expect Iran to play along and trust basically the United Nations security recommendation, resolution, the TFF, and so on? I mean, why would you want to be part of a family that's just simply gonna have a double system of rules, if you will, where one kids get pretty much everything and the other one's got to shut up and starve, you know, if he wants to eventually hit a little bit and the sanctions been alleviated? You know, that's really simply just not something that any nation will appreciate. And that is really the problem of the 21st century, that the big power will have to resolve one way or the other, because at this stage, I think all the shenanigans has kind of surfaced, and it's for everyone to see. And it's really up now to, you know, Iran, Russia, and China to decide, you know, if they want to go for another 100 years of this constant dominations, where, you know, the application of international law simply just, you know, applies to you, but not to the US and barely to Europe, you know. So is it the world we want to be living in? Is it the world that we want our kids to grow? Perhaps not. And perhaps this is the time for this balance of power, you know, to be revisited. And then perhaps, as some have said, that the Yalta II, for example, is something that eventually will see the day, because without the respect for this sphere of influence in all the regions, whether it's Eurasia, West Asia, Southeast Asia, without recognizing this, we are literally sprinting to a World War III. There's no doubt about this. And the economic aspect of everything that we are seeing at the moment unfolding, presented as negotiation for peace and bringing democracy to the world, is nothing else but securing basically very important trade routes to benefit basically the Western world, and more importantly, the dying US economy.
And this is just, I mean, obviously kabuki theater here, typical Netanyahu showmanship at the UN with his drawings he likes to do. Trump's starting to catch on to this as well, this sort of technique of presentations. But what strikes me about this, just looking at the absolute plethora of evidence of Israel's nuclear weapons program, undeclared, secret, illegal by every international standard, okay, and against U.S. law, by the way. The U.S. is prohibited by law to be arming or giving aid, financial aid, to any country that has or is pursuing WMDs and outside of the international framework, and that's Israel. So the U.S. is in violation of their own laws, full stop. But what Israel is doing here is gaslighting, Freddie, because what it's all about Iran, Iran, Iran. The Trump administration mindlessly, all the MAGA bots are just repeating the same script, you know, Iran, Iran, Iran. And this is the actual issue. This is a distraction by Netanyahu, by Israel, to deflect people's attention away from Israel. and their WMDs, which they use to basically extort, to blackmail countries. Who knows what sort of veiled or inferred or kind of implicit threats when Israel makes when they deal with their counterparts in the US, either behind closed doors or even in closed session or through lobbies and emissaries, which there are many billionaires in America that are part of the mega group, that are part of the lobby. This is just an unacceptable kind of relationship. It's not transparent. It's not open, Fred. And this has been like this for a very long time. And now we're getting to the precipice of World War III over Iran's nukes, which they don't actually have. Okay, this is. I think it's time. This issue, there's light shined on this issue now. We can't. The world can't wait anymore. I think
the thing is, and I'm the first to look into that and trying to see, what is the solutions apart from, recognizing officially and, putting both countries, making sure Iran has that transparency, which they've showed that they wanted to be part of this kind of program where this is peaceful, and it's not part of the Iranian culture, if you will. The fatwa is very clear, and we can clearly see that, although Al-Khomeini has been described as a terrorist and as a complete lunatic, but he's not. He's someone that has a lot of restraint, but he's going to look for his own interests. It's going to be Iran first, not US first, not Israel first. It's going to be Iran first, and Iran first is about making sure that his national security are taken care of, if you will, and these priorities are taken care of. And one of this national security, you cannot come from anywhere from the one, walk in Iran and tell you, you're going to cut your ballistic missile, for example. Your complete operation needs to go down because it's a threat to Israel and to your neighbors. Under which regulation, which law? What is, not even that, is what is the legal background that allows you to tell a nation, a sovereign nation that is a member of the UN,
can't defend themselves.
You cannot defend yourself, just stay open so that we can come and blow the hell out of you. No, this is really completely ludicrous, from Trump to come and all this nonsense. So it might be that he put that out there in order to say, well, okay, I'll pass you on that. But the real aim is the nuclear program. But the Iranians have already said it. We're not going to comply with whatever the US is going to say. Because if they wanted to comply, they would have already agreed to have a face-to-face conversation with the United States. They don't trust the UN. There's absolutely historically no reason for them to trust them. Why on earth they would want to talk to them face-to-face when clearly they already know what the United States wants, and what the United States wants is what Israel wants, basically. And it's basically a defenseless Iran that is going to be dismantling not only the financing, the supporting of the resistance, because they're trying to avoid a genocide in the Gaza Strip. They're trying to avoid Syria to be invaded by Israel, and they're trying to avoid Lebanon to be massacred by Israel. All that is that we have one rogue state. So it's like mathematics, there is elements, there is equations, and if you move out one element of this equation, suddenly there is a beautiful mathematical equation. Everything works, everything seems to come together, and everything works. But if you have one rogue element in this equation, you get ugly mathematics. And that's exactly what I'm saying here. I'm saying a really rogue element, and unfortunately the US is backing these elements. And the results of it can only be deception, of so-called negotiations with Witkoff. I mean, there's a video of Witkoff speaking about yesterday about, Iran is only allowed to 3.67% enrichment. That's all he needs for his civilian nuclear program. But if you go above that, 20-60%, we will not allow. Who's we? Who's we? Who's the United States to tell anyone, but Israel what to do? First, if you're going to go and preach something, at least, you got to obey by the book. And the book said that Israel has a rogue nuclear weapon program. Address it, made it public, dismantle it, and then you can go out there, knock at other doors and say, okay, because the idea that Israel will not be the first, to put a nuclear weapon in the Middle East, that's okay for the media and for the bozo show, but in the reality, it's already there, and it's extremely dangerous, and it makes the country and the region completely volatile.
So you're going to bring this this piece here up on screen. The hidden alliance, U.S. presidents and Israel's nuclear power. I know the original image you've updated. I saw the original draft of the image, and you had Richard Nixon in there as well. I mean, you didn't miss anybody, but here you've got obviously Netanyahu in the background. This is a criminal character that has been involved in so much dirty work in the background over the years. But then you've got George Bush Sr., Barack Obama, George Bush Jr. Now, the relationship between Israel and George Bush Sr. was very contentious, and his son had a little bit of that with Ariel Sharon, and so they dismantled the settlements in the Gaza Strip. Of course, when they did that, they pulled out of Gaza. The IDF, they built a few 100,000 more settlements in the West Bank, but that's a separate discussion. But nonetheless, this is the point. U.S. presidents have been part kind of a cover-up, if you will, but then this kind of silent, secret alliance in the background. I wonder, Freddie, when I look at this, and we'll go through some of the material in this article, but, if there's not black budget money earmarked for the maintenance of Israel's nuclear weapons program, because that's not cheap, just to have and maintain, and then to refit and update, you're talking a couple of billion a year baseline costs, right? It's not cheap. Having in any nuclear level of nuclear weapons is not cheap. So I really am skeptical on the classification levels on this topic, and what sort of financial support the U.S. gives to Israel, because Israel, I guarantee you, is not paying for this. They don't have that size of an economy. Your thoughts on this, and we'll go through some of the material in this piece.
Yes, the data out there indicates about 1.7, 1.9 billions yearly in terms of maintaining, a safe nuclear facility, if you will, including the weapon side of it and everything. And so, but that's just really the tip of the iceberg, because don't forget that you need a large investment into technology and capability to deliver these nuclear weapons. So Colin Powell was talking about 200 nuclear weapons. So if you're going to be projecting and having such a deterrence, you're going to have the logistics that goes with it, not only just the maintenance of these warheads and the technology that goes with it, and of course maintaining a plutonium reactor plant, enrichment plants, and all that. It's just costs far more money than that. So, as you said rightly, so the Israeli cannot afford, really, as a state, I'm not talking about the Jewish people, I'm talking about Israel as a state, will rather to have the United States to pick up the bill. And the way it was done, as I explained earlier, is by compelling, Obama, Bush Jr., and Clinton, and of course Trump, and have them to contravene the Symington and the Glenn amendments of the U.S. Arms Export Control Act, and that is an act that imposed limitation on foreign assistance to other nations. So if you look into these amendments, if you will, they prohibit the U.S. to assist countries involved in the transfers of this technology and nuclear reprocessing equipment and so on. But what is also very interesting is that this 20 U.S. Code 2799 AA-1, that is what we're talking about here, this U.S. Arms Export Control Act. It prohibits the United States government, and it forced them to terminate all foreign military financing, for instance, for Israel. And also they must deny Israel any credit guarantees or other financial assistance. And that includes not only the White House or the State Departments, but the entire instrumentality of the United States government. So that's very clear that this is what the presidents have agreed. They've agreed to contravene their own US code in order to please Israel and to allow basically the financing of this nuclear weapon operation in the middle of the Middle East, with some obviously very unhappy neighbors. And we can clearly see in the IAEA documents, 67 and way beyond that after that, they've approached the IAEA, and most of the opposition to the Israeli nuclear program come from the Arab world and saying, we cannot have these rogue countries, developing this. And the only reason why they're not saying anything is because they're getting obviously good business from the United States, and money's been spread, to keep people quiet. This is really the unbelievable and the most shocking part of it, is that countries are prepared to violate their own law in order to maintain and to take care of a rogue countries like Israel.
Look at
what does
I want to get, you mentioned before this policy of ambiguity, and that's explained in this piece right up at 21st Century Wire today. But amimut is, I guess, the Hebrew word for ambiguity. I'm not sure, but it's very clear here, maintaining the confidentiality of its nuclear operations, which involves refraining from testing or publicly declaring the possession of nuclear weapons, and number two, enhancing its nuclear profile through strategic leaks, public statements, speculation, alongside the dissemination of indirect evidence regarding its nuclear capabilities. So that's according to these Israeli sources here. Jimmy Carter estimated between 150 and 300 warheads. That was in back when he was, after he was president, obviously, through the Carter Institute. But I mean, so anybody that's kind of skirting around this issue at this point, there's so much evidence that you've also helped bring together with your research, and a lot of these great pieces up at 21st Century Wire here, Freddie. State Department, Kissinger, 1969. Yeah. Intelligence suggests that Israel is swiftly advancing in its ability to manufacture and employ nuclear weapons. There we go. It's right there.
It's right there. I mean, we're not making this stuff up. It's just out there. It's available for the public to see. It's been declassified, so we're not, pulling things. We're not hacking anyone. And if you got the guys, there's a complete group set up in the United States at the time of Kissinger to address this problem, really, because it becomes a major problem, because it goes completely against the public policy, the foreign policies, everything that the Congress and the White House is trying to push, portray out there. And it goes really through various administrations, where we're told that weaponizing the Middle East, allowing the weapon of mass destruction to be built in the Middle East is just a bad idea. But unfortunately, history has really, really shown, and I think Israel knows it very well, that you look at Iraq, look at Libya, look at Syria, all the countries, in these particular regions or in the Arab world that does not possess nuclear weapons is kind of subjected to the United States and to hegemon, if you will. And if you don't play by the book, they'll come and destroy your countries. That's what they did in so many countries so far. And Iran is definitely, we know that. Wesley Clark said it, the former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe said it in his interviews. After the 9/11, they said there were 7 countries we need to go out there and destroy, and it was Sudan, Libya, Syria, Iraq, and you name it. So this is not news. This is not someone that is, completely sick in his head. This is the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, surprised by the neocons telling him they're going to go and destroy these countries. So if we just keep that, as an understanding, as a fact, and then after that applied anything that we are saying today, does it truly matter, all this negotiation? Is it not just to soothe the public, prepare the public to say, well, we're going to have to go to Iran, because they're not playing along, and they're a threat to Israel and to their neighbors. Saudi Arabia is scared, Qatar is scared, everyone is scared in the region, So we might as well get rid of them, and keep a couple of millions of people, clean up the surface. That is the world we're living in. It's a world of lie and deceit, unfortunately. And as I said, this piece is not about after the Jewish people. I have no problem with Jewish people. My problem lies with these rogue states out there that has been for way too long, maintained and kept in power and kept in business by the United States, and forcing the United States to break their own law. All right. So Israel is not a friend of the United States. Doesn't matter if you can repeat it thousands of times. No country should oblige and force US and the US taxpayers to agree to break their own rules so that they can keep on feeding these rogue states. That is clearly in contraventions of so many international law, including humanitarian laws. And we can all see that. So why on earth you would want to support the killing of a group? Why? This is genocide. That's what you support when you agree to that. Doesn't matter if you like Arabs or you don't like Arabs. It's irrelevant. You're Catholic or you're not. All this is irrelevant. That belongs to you and to you alone. Your faith is yours. But respects other people way of living, and more importantly, respect others people freedom, lands, right to develop and to control their futures. And that's not what Israel is doing at the moment. And that's not what the United States is doing around the world since I've been born. This hegemon has to stop. We need to go back to this equilibrium. This equilibrium when we can all work together for the benefit of all and not just for few.
And this has to be underlined here, Fred, just from a historical note. Again, this is in the piece that you've put up at 21 Wire this week. Israel subsequently included a provision in the secret document stating that the Jewish state would defend itself by itself, indicating that it did not depend on the U.S. nuclear shield due to its own nuclear capabilities. Shockingly, Israel has managed to compel Presidents Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, all to contravene the Symington and Glenn amendments of the U.S. Arms Export Control Act. It's law in America, ladies and gentlemen, which imposes limitations on foreign assistance to other nations who are involved in WMDs. Okay, as a result, Israel has been the recipient of substantial and mostly illegal foreign aid, including the last tranche of $30 billion since October 7th from the United States. And there's Richard Nixon with Golda Meir in 1974. And
71, maybe, I think.
Or
74.
Yeah,
74. Then she came earlier, but she wasn't there in 1974 as well. Correct. Look, it's the whole idea behind that. If you were to resume it in one sentence, it's really about making sure that the United States is not able to pressure Israel to accede to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. That's what Israel wants. They don't want to be bullied into this NPT, but they want the Iranian to be, but they don't want them to be in that situation. And that's where this entire situation at the moment is extremely sensitive. I can only say it again and again, but this is a very sensitive situation because it involves more than Israel, more than Iran, more than the United States. It involves the largest powers, the most powerful nuclear nations on this planet. And I am not quite sure, Russia and China are prepared to let Iran go under the fire of the United States bombers, without moving, without actually protecting what has been set in motion, which is the BRICS, which is Iran is, as I say, a signatory to the BRICS, but also to the Shanghai corporations and many others. So this is an important economic partner for largest powers in the world. And I'm afraid that route has to be protected. It will be protected. And I think that is why at the moment the Trump administration is trying to wait. Can we go out there and keep everybody quiet? And that's what they're trying to understand. But they're very much aware of this very tight, security agreements, strategic security agreement between Russia and Iran. And then, of course, the same goes between China and Iran. So what does it imply? To which level, Iran, China, and Russia are prepared to support Iran, whether diplomatically or even, geopolitically speaking, And China has already kind of mentioned that whatever happens, they will always support Iran economically, even if it goes down that road as well. So it's not an easy path, and unfortunately, I don't see the diplomatic acumen in any of the delegations coming from the United States, nor from the IAEA, that will kind of, have the tools in order to, to put on the table something that could, I would say, that could accommodate these sensitive topics and the tensions within the region. It's all about de-escalation. It's all about removing these weapons from these lands. And unless we can address Israel, we cannot address Iran, period. It's not double standard, and it doesn't work that way, and it's extremely difficult to sell. And that's why I'm saying, and I said it again, I don't believe these negotiations are done in good faith. I think they are looking just to put Iran in a corner to justify an attack on Iran. And I hope it's not going to go down that road, and other diplomatic channels that are not made public will intervene to avoid World War III.
There's one other story before we're going to probably wrap up this conversation very shortly, Freddie, and you've done a brilliant job giving us a broad overview of what's at stake, and also the historical context it's very important to prove the case. So we've just presented a few key evidence points, just so there's no confusion whether this is fact or not. Okay, Israel has a substantial nuclear arsenal, and their policy of not declaring it, this policy of ambiguity, is where they derive their power and leverage from. People understand this concept, please. But the Vela incident, Freddie, this is something that I overlooked, which you have dug up for our readers, which I think is a very interesting story indeed. Let's bring this up on stage to have a look at this, Fred. Explain to us what this is all about, because this seems to be so indicative of the problem of the relationship between Israel and the U.S. But take this away, please.
Yes, the Vela incident is a very interesting one. It's been well, publicized at a time back in 1979. It was actually September the 22nd of 79, and this is the time where the U.S. Vela satellite was scanning the South Atlantic during that time, and what they found is clear indications of a nuclear test that was conducted and believed to have been conducted by Israel and apartheid South Africa. I made it sure it's apartheid South Africa, not the current South African. And then this incident basically took place during the Jimmy Carter administrations. And then what we had for years, ongoing conversations about what happened. Was it a nuclear test? Because it was extremely embarrassing, Patrick. You have a policy on one side that says no nuclear weapon in the Middle East, and it's all kind of like portrayed out there. It's very solid. U.S. is against the proliferations of weapon of mass destructions and so on. And then on the other side, you get the rogue Israeli guys doing some testing. It just simply doesn't look good. And Jimmy Carter was not impressed. And there was a lot of doubt about whether Jimmy Carter will embrace these Israeli, machines. But again, at the time, the AIPAC, all these Zionist movements were extremely so powerful at the time that there were so many way of leveraging power, especially the financial power at the time. And then what we have is in December 2016, the CIA funded a panel of scientists which were tasked to determine, whether there was a flash detected, by the U.S. Vela satellite. And then very quickly, it was quite clear that there was some indications that not only one but several facilities from the U.S. government had actually confirmation that it was indeed a nuclear explosion that had occurred. And one of them was a base in an island known as the Ascension Island, which is basically south of the equator in the South Atlantic Ocean. It's about 960 miles from the coast of Africa. And this island is actually an RAF, British Royal Air Force stations, and it's also used by the European space stations, rocket tracking stations. So they were able to really have, pretty much an understanding. If you read the documents, it kind of explained to you that it was about a 1.92 kilo tons kind of weapons, and that clearly did not yield what it was supposed to yield. So who had the capacity, who had the capabilities, why on earth Israel's name keep on popping up during testings of nuclear weapons? All that is a very, very interesting story again, and I think that's the reason why I wanted to post it, because it's important to know that this is part of this ongoing discussions, debate about how to cover Israel, to making sure that everybody is not going to talk about the Israeli nuclear weapon program. I think the Clinton administration was the worst with that. They used to really literally threaten people about coming forward with any information about the Israeli nuclear weapon program, and basically threatening people with firing them and for them losing their jobs and more, and much more than that. So it is a sensitive topic, and that is the reason why you can see across the House and the Congress zero mention about this Israeli nuclear weapon program. All eyes on Iran, but leave Israel alone. And that's what we're here. We're here to say no. Let's bring the debate once and for all, and let's make sure that all the actors in mass, in weapon of mass destructions and nuclear weaponries are brought to the table in this discussion, not only one because it's convenient.
And now, just going to read this paragraph here, Freddie, in the Vela incident post. You write here, today, Israel and the U.S. are gaslighting the world by using the Iran nuclear topic as a smokescreen to deflect from the public's attention from the atrocities of the Gaza genocide. 100% true. For many years, presidents of the United States and congressional representatives have deliberately ignored Israel's significant breaches of American legislation. However, there's hardly been a better time for using American lawfare to halt Israel's warfare in Gaza and expose the hypocrisy surrounding Israel's nuclear ambiguity strategy. Absolutely true. This is the best time to take on this issue. So, is the political will there, or will it come to a point, Freddie? And this is a little bit of a stretch by some people's estimation, but not. I'm very open-minded about the future. Could there be a situation where Israel would present such a threat to the U.S., to U.S. allies, to regional global stability, that somebody in the U.S. establishment will open the door for opening up lawfare sanctions, or at some point somebody will have to do something to restrain this mad dog that has grown completely, to outsized levels of power, has broken its, previous leash, if you will, and is now threatening everybody in the neighborhood. And could we be approaching that moment?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's why I said there's no better time, because we have a genocide. We have a responsibility. Every nation that is signatory to the Geneva Convention and is the Genocide Convention is bound to do everything in their power to stop it. We play a role in that, even if as independent journalists we do that. But everyone should really now start to ask for for transparencies, and more importantly, there are legal tools today that are available to the United States citizens, to force the United States government to drop any support to Israel, whether it's the weapon deliveries, whatever it is, the nuclear arrangement that they have, but also on many different aspects, and this is the reason why we were talking about the importance, of attacking, if you will, in a respective manner, but to attacking the U.S. governments on the Symington and Glenn amendments, and using that tools, to force them basically to close the tap and say, okay, sorry, Israel, we can't do that anymore. We can't give you money. We cannot keep on financing. We cannot send that. And if you look into this US Arms Export Control Act, you could see that it paralyzed a country's very quickly, from agriculture to technology to so many things that the United States is providing to Israel. So this it is really about obeying to the Constitution. It is about to obey the rules set forth by the US American people and the Congress and the Senate and by the forefathers, and making sure that this was put in there for a reason. And Israel is not an exception. When you put rules, sets, and law, it applies to every nation, and that includes Israel, unless Israel is just another state of the United States, and perhaps we should know about it. But last time I checked, Israel is an independent state, and therefore it is subjected to these regulations. But the U.S., it is up to the U.S. people now to go after the governments and force them, and force the Congress and the Senate to have hearing on this,
to obey the law.
Just obey the law, you know. It's don't make law, because look, policymakers make law. They go out there, that's what they do. And if you tell them, well, you know, it doesn't matter if you make law, we don't have to obey them, then you're a banana republic.
Well, that's the Trump, you know, that's the MAGA argument, the Trump administration on immigration. There are laws on the books to control the U.S. southern border. There's things that were supposed to have been done under Joe Biden that the government just decided to not enforce existing laws on the books, and it created this massive crisis that's now so far gone and out of control that the Trump administration are struggling to manage it. And this is, but on this situation, and the Republicans and conservatives always say, just follow the laws on the books. That's what they always say. But on this one, a little bit of an issue, because Israel.
Yeah. Well, it obviously raising many questions, of course, and as far as I'm concerned, it's about the judicial precedent. You know, it's really about setting up a precedent that if we allow, you know, the First Amendment in the United States to be trampled on, that's it. It's over. Time is over. Your freedom of speech, your ideas, the idea of expressing your ideas, your thought is going to be controlled. That's what you're allowing to happen. So I think it's really time to wake up. You know, you have a great, one of the probably the best constitution in the world a nation can be provided with, and it was made for a reason, to protect you, to protect citizens. That's why this constitution is there. That's why these amendments are there, is to protect you. If you don't want to be protected, then don't do nothing. Let these guys, let these bozos, you know, take over whatever, and then eventually take over your mind. They'll think for you. They'll do the thinking. They'll say, you know, just keep on paying your tax. We'll do the thinking for you. Because clearly, if you were thinking, you would not allow us to do that, right? Yeah,
that's it. You know, Mahmoud Khalil, we talked a lot about that case previously, but it's like, yeah, there are laws on the books. Kind of serious when you're dealing with weapons of mass destruction, Fred. At least I like to think so. Maybe other people are just in denial. But now we've got a real crisis on our hands with the standoff with Iran, this nuclear standoff, which could easily careen into something much, much more serious, and we could pass the point of no return. We don't want to see that happen. Certainly nobody in the region does. And just on an aside, again, we'll remind people everything we've spoken about today, one of the best independent documentary films to give you background on Israel's secret nuclear weapons program and how they stole all of the intel and the material from the United States using Israeli spy networks on U.S. soil. Fact, folks, and this happens quite a lot. NUMEC, filmed by Ryan Dawson, How Israel Stole the Bomb and Killed JFK. Subtitle of the title there, how they killed JFK. So Ryan's just done an extraordinary piece of documentary film work here, and we have often referred to it and referenced it in some of our programs and previous reports that Freddie and I have done here on the Midweek Wire as well. And I probably would like to get you and Ryan together on a panel to talk about just the broader issue, including what we've discussed today, Fred. But what I like is that you've come today with an idea, and this is like we also had previously come up with ideas of how to, so what can we do to kind of provide some kind of a solution for this this crisis, and what's available in terms of what can we possibly the lawfare and enforcing the laws in the books. I think this is an excellent starting point, Freddie. People don't realize that they have tools. People have tools. There are still laws in the books. There's still regulations. They're just not being enforced. And if you remember 3 weeks ago, we'll bring this up on screen here. My possible solution to this Iran nuclear dilemma. This is when the U.S. was threatening to annihilate. When Trump was had his kind of hair trigger finger threatening annihilation to the Iranians. That hey, let's have a JCPOA, Fred. Let's have it, but let's include Israel with Iran. Why don't we pursue a nuclear-free Middle East? How about that? Let's open Israel up to international transparency and regulations and non-proliferation. Let's do that, because you can't have Israel with nukes and not have other countries in the region.
It should be the cornerstone of this agreement, actually. That's what it should be, because if you cannot have any serious agreements by treating one party and the other ones differently. This is not an agreement. This is bullying someone into some kind of things that he's not really happy to do it, but because he's got a knife on his throat, and he might agree to it. But I don't see Iran being scared at all here. I don't think they're showing any kind of impatience. I think they've been very measured. We saw that in their response, with this kind of exchange of ballistic missiles and the various shenanigans Israel was involved with. But we can clearly see the restraint, and this ladder, of course, of escalations in the conflict is directed by what the other guys do, depending on how high you're prepared to go. And you can clearly see that Iran has not retaliated yet. And they said they will retaliate when the time comes. Now, I hope they won't, to be honest with you, because I don't think it's worth it, because it's putting the bar pretty high in terms of the escalation ladder, and you don't want to do that, because then Israel will escalate and the US will escalate, and this is not promoting peace. So you want that pose. We had a ceasefire, which obviously Netanyahu destroyed very quickly, because his life and his freedom depend on it, as we all know. The chaos that is happening in Israel. And, as I say, when you get more than 100 former Mossad getting involved and stating that, that's, they prefer basically to have peace in Gaza and to stop the war as long as they can get their hostage back. There's still some kind of soul, people with a soul left, and saying, how about we actually do what we say and then we get our hostage back, and trying to perhaps, come back to the international community and explain that what has happened over the past year and a half is a big mistake. It's a big mistake, and some people needs to hang for that. They need to hang, because you can't just go out there killing your neighbors, or people not actually neighbors, people that you're responsible for, because you colonize them, which make you the responsible for this nation, and calling in, an external actors and terrorists and whatever. You colonize these people. They just want their freedom and they want their state, because this land is as their land as perhaps it is yours. But that is for the jurists to decide, the international law to decide, not Freddie Ponton in France in his village. This is this is about humanity. This is really where I'm trying to always bring it back to simple fact, because we are so drawn out away from humanity. It's always about money, economics, priority, geopolitics. What about us? What about us human as people? Can we still care about each other? Can we live with each other's differences? Or do we just have to embrace, Zionism, or we have to embrace terrorism, or we have to embrace destructions of cities, destructions of life, and more importantly, making sure that people getting accustomed so much to it that they're literally completely oblivious to it anymore. You don't see it after a year and a half of seeing children being murdered, women's being murdered, men's being, dismembered and so on. And you see that for a year and a half, and still the hypocrisy of the West. I mean, that includes us, the French. What are we doing to actually stop that? We say that's what we set up the United Nations. That's what the Nuremberg trial was all about. It's what having institutions to prevent this kind of crimes. And yet we can see that not these institutions are not working, because I hear a lot, these institutions, they're useless, they don't work. No, they work perfectly. It's just the corruption.
Yeah.
It is the money. They are subjected to finance like any institutions. They are subjected to politics like any institutions. And that is what rotting the rot inside this institution. But they don't blame the institution. Blame those that are basically being put in there, making a lot of money, being privileged, working with, going around. I've seen the UN a lot, and I know the lifestyle. So they can't, you can't gaslight me. I've seen it firsthand. So the bottom line here is that, if you work in the public interest, politics has no place. It's about human, and it's about life, protecting life at all costs. That's what makes us human. That's what define and characterize, our species. And if we cannot do that, we cannot call ourselves humans. And right now, I think we're inhuman. We're absolutely inhuman, because we're allowing people to kill others, and we don't do anything about it.
No. Oh, yeah. Up in arms about the latest Russian missile strike in Sumy. Not a word from anybody about the entire city of 2 million people flattened into a pile of dust. I mean, it's just such a unnerving thing to look at. But the biggest disappointment is that there's no reaction to it. I said this at a recent event I spoke at, is that, of all the look at Europe, Germany's supporting Israel without any reservations. The UK, of course, but Germany, of all countries, the top European power, and they're so desperate to atone for their guilt of the Second World War that they're willing to atone down to the last Palestinian, alongside the United States and Britain. But Germany should have learned this lesson, that you can't, you shouldn't be supporting a genocide no matter what. So that to me is the failure of Western civilization in a nutshell. Like, this is just the best example that the West, and all of its, largesse and, cultural dominance, and 1,000 years of European domination of this planet. Let's call it what it is, 1,000 years. And now it's clearly coming to an end. And look at this scene in Gaza, and look at the people backing it. They're so scared not to even say a word to Israel, to push back even a little bit. They're frightened. They're terrified in Europe. These leaders, they're afraid of the lobby. They're afraid of the press. They don't want to be, because they don't want to be on the wrong side of the issue. But meanwhile, they are on the wrong side of the issue. They're so badly on the wrong side of the issue that it really just shows the inhumanity of these the power structures that we have erected. What utter failures the post-World War II order has become. And it's really, like you said, Freddie, it's down to corruption. What more can we say? It's just it's simple as that.
They all have a I would say a common denominator. These countries, the West and Israel and the US, they all have one, and that they all have this ability to self-destroy, because the enemies is themselves. It's nobody else but themselves. And that's what we are saying right now, is the worst enemy of the United States is not Iran. Iran is not a national security threat for the United States. It's not a priority. It's a priority for Israel, because Israel is hanging by a thread. They know that basically now they're going to have to answer to these crimes that they've committed live on national television for a year and a half. They can't just turn the page and say this never happened. This is not going to be possible. So this is what's happening at the moment, and it's the futures of nations. And what's happening in Israel, it's going to come to the United States. It's going to come to France. It's going to come everywhere, because there is a time where people won't be able, and the new generations that are coming, they are not as polite as we are. They're definitely not. And they're sick of these things. They just don't want it in their life. Right? They don't understand it much, and those that understand it just don't want it. So how are we going to handle? Because the mass media on the televisions, the black box was there to feed us, our generations. But these kids on social media, they're very independent. They have a complete different lifestyle, and they're really not interested in the system that we are proposing them. Right? And that's what this entire great reset is about: reforming systems, because these systems simply does not work for the 21st centuries and for the generations to come. So you change that, and one of the components of changing this is to gain control, because you won't be able to control these new generations. They're too independent. They're whole, nerds. They're very good at, and I admire them, don't get me wrong. I admire them. I think many of them are so talented, but they don't want to be plugged into the system. They just want to do their own things. And they're right. And we should have done it at the same time. We just gave too much leeway. We believed, and we wonder whether we bought the lie or whether we were sold a lie. And I think both happened.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and we'll end on that note, Fred. Freddie Ponton. Again, there's his X Twitter handle along the bottom of the screen there, Freddie_Ponton. Freddie is a contributor and a writer, investigative journalist, a researcher at 21stcenturywire.com. But follow his posts on X. He's posting stuff daily, and whatever he posts is definitely important and things that you need to know. So you do want to be following that account. Freddie, thank you for spending your time, and appreciate your research on this very important topic. We will do a follow-up program with a little more detail on some of these other key issues. But thank you again.
My pleasure. All the best.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Freddie Ponton, who's joining us on the live link from France. And this is an important issue. Of course, we're just, as usual, scratching the surface in just over an hour of coverage on this. But it is important, and everybody's affected by it one way or another. And it does shape U.S. foreign policy. It shapes the Middle East. And ultimately, that's going to shape global geopolitics. So it's definitely something that we think you need to know about. Look, we're going to wrap it up, and appreciate everybody on the live stream. And thank you for the comments. We haven't had time to get to comments on the midweek. We normally on the Sunday Wire, which we hope you will tune into each week. This is our weekly omnibus news and analysis radio program, brought to you here on these same streams at 21stcenturywire.com as well. That's a bit of a longer show. We go through listeners and interact with the comments during the second segment. So, yeah, we really appreciate you guys being active and involved. And we'll do it again on the weekend as usual, although for Easter Sunday, we will have maybe a slightly altered schedule. We're not sure what we're going to be running for that. But normally every Sunday, the Sunday Wire is broadcasting at 21stcenturywire.com. That's what we do, and appreciate all you guys. And if you like this content, you like what we're doing, you like this sort of thing, and you want to see us do more of it, do support us. Click on the link at the top of my X profile, take you to our website, donate and support page. And again, you just go to 21stcenturywire.com, hit donate or support. You'll get all the various options there, even crypto donations. Many people donate to us with crypto, plus the PayPal, the usual credit cards, etc. But really subscribe and become a member at 21wire.tv. That is our monthly members site. That's how you can support our work and great journalists like Freddie Ponton. This is how we do it. So we do fund independent journalism, and we've had a lot of great success stories over the years from some of the journalists that we have helped to develop, and investigative reports and areas of reporting that we are basically supporting and then publishing at 21st Century Wire. That's just one of the important pieces of work that we do for you and everybody out there. And we wouldn't be able to do it without your help. So do support us. We need your help now more than ever, especially. This is a very difficult time for everybody. Economically, but we hope you can find it within yourself to support the work that we do. We are expanding our programming, so we appreciate you guys, because we do want to add a few more strings to the bow on the programming side. We're also redesigning our members site. That's pretty exciting, although it's taking a long time. It's not an easy task, but we have a good team. We're putting a good team together, so do do support us if you can. That's all we've got time for. And I will, before we go to closing credits, I'll leave you with this, I think, very relevant video by one of the most talented songwriters on the planet. In my opinion, anyway, Joseph Arthur is absolutely brilliant. And he wrote a song called Ceasefire Now, right after October 7th, and released it on social media. And it got amazing traction at the time. But here we are a year and a half later. I'm listening to Joseph's music and I'm like, I can't believe this is too relevant now. I thought this thing would have been wrapped up, but it's not. But we'll leave you with Joseph's really amazing piece of art, piece of music here. And we'll see you guys on the weekend and see you here next week for the Midweek Wire. All the best.
Sides when their mothers cry, and no real way to justify their death that comes from an evil sky. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. Damaged like a nuclear bomb, dressed in a kill box. People can't escape. They're told to leave, but where can they go? A genocide, some think it's biblical faith. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. This might be the last time to raise a hand about who we are. What's this say about who we are? 'Cause this might be the last time to raise a hand about who we are. What's this say about who we are? Digital images and digital lies cut out their heart along with their supplies. The propaganda leads to dehumanize our fellow humans and silence their cries. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. What's this say about who we are?